Can we all agree that the most confusing part of building cabinets is figuring out those drawers? What's the best way to build them? How do you know what slides to use? And maybe the biggest mystery of all, how do you determine the size and spacing of all those drawers?
I have no idea.
Well, I'm going to try to demystify all that and lay it out as simply as I can so you can tackle drawers with confidence. So let's begin at the beginning. 99% of the time, I build my drawers using the same basic method, which is really simple. I've got my 4 drawer sides. 3 of them have a 1/4 inch groove in them to hold the bottom panel, but the back does not. It's a little bit shorter, and I'll explain why that matters so much in just a minute. I cut the grooves usually at the table saw, and it doesn't really matter how big and fancy your saw is. Any table saw can do this. And if you're bereft of table saw, a little palm router with an edge guide can do this work too. But regardless of the tool you use, I've got a really simple rule of thumb that's easy to remember. I make a 1/4 inch wide groove that's 3/8 of an inch deep and 1/2 an inch from the bottom of the drawer. I call it the 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, 1/2 rule. Or for my metric friends, the 6.35, 9.525, 12.7 rule.
That's not how it works. Now, how do you know how it works?
Okay, where was I? Oh yeah, so the left and right side always go on the outside, and the front and back go in between them. And one of the reasons for doing it that way is now the joinery is going to be running in this direction, which is going to better resist the forces of opening and closing the drawers over time. Also, having the sides be on the outside gives you joinery options that you wouldn't otherwise have if you wanted a clean looking side with nothing showing. So back to the back, the reason that I make this shorter, well actually there's several reasons. Once the drawer sides are assembled, I can just slide the bottom panel in from the back side, easy peasy. And to me this is a lot less hectic than trying to assemble the drawer with the bottom fully captured on all 4 sides. Then I can just screw the bottom to the drawer back, and that's going to secure it in place, and it also gives me the option to remove the bottom in the event that I ever need to do a repair on the drawer in the future. Also, with there being no bottom in place, I can really easily clean up any of the glue squeeze out from these inside corners and then apply finish to the drawer without having those awkward inside corners to deal with that are created when the bottom's already installed. I always make my drawer bottoms out of pre-finished plywood, so there's really no reason for them to be installed when I'm finishing the drawers. And the final thing to mention here is what to build your drawers out of, and for me, I follow a couple basic rules. If I'm going to be building built-ins, laundries, office spaces, basically anywhere that's low use or where higher quality isn't called for, I go with plywood, usually Baltic birch. And if the drawers are going into a kitchen or a nice piece of furniture like a coffee table, nightstand, that type of thing, I make them out of solid wood. And regardless of solid wood or plywood, I always shoot for 5/8 of an inch thick material because I find that it's ideal for just about every drawer application. So, to build your drawers, you have options, and boy, let me tell you, there are a lot of internet know-it-alls out there with PhDs in YouTube watching that absolutely insist that this is the only joint to use because it's the strongest, or this one takes real craftsmanship and only hacks would do it any other way. But I want you to block all that noise out of your mind and just know that in this video, all the methods I'm showing are 100% great for making amazing drawer boxes, and in the end, it just comes down to preference and aesthetics. The simplest and fastest way of making a strong drawer box is the humble and unassuming butt joint. And fun fact, it's also going to be the butt of any joke made by someone with the sense of humor of a 13-year-old. And in fact, all 4 of these are butt joints, and they're all made in completely different ways. You don't need any special skills to do this. You have a range of tools that fit your budget, and most importantly, you can build them very, very efficiently, which is going to be important to you if you're low on time or if time is money. Doweling jigs are pretty cheap and require you to have just the drill and the jig, but they can be cumbersome and time-consuming to lay out accurately and leave you no room for error, so you've got to get those holes bang on in the right location. Good in a pinch, but not real optimal. And on the other hand, you've got machines like a dual doweler, a domino, and a lamella, which definitely make things a lot more efficient, but do come at a premium price, which is oftentimes outside of your budget, which I am constantly reminded of down in the comments. And then there's pocket screws, which I call the Goldilocks method. Not too cumbersome, not too expensive, just right. I use pocket screws almost exclusively for drawer boxes, whether it's workshop or kitchen, hardwood or ply. They're cheap and easy to understand, they make assembly go by very quickly, and even if you use glue in your joints, you don't have to wait for that to sit around and dry in the clamps like you do with dowels or dominoes. And ironically, I get just as much hate when I use these as when I use my domino, so who says internet woodworking is boring? So I mentioned this earlier, but one of the benefits of using butt joints is that they do leave an aesthetically clean looking drawer side, which is a key feature in a lot of modern cabinetry. So whichever of the methods that I just showed you that you end up using, no one's going to know but you. But there are definitely cases where a clean drawer side isn't the look you're going for. You want to add some visual interest here, show off your woodworking skills, and give that thing some pop. And the good news is there's a couple of really great options for this. Dovetails are the prime example here, whether you cut them by hand or do what I did and just use a dovetail jig and a router. It's going to give you a very classic looking drawer side that's just wood and glue, no fasteners needed. You can go with full through dovetails or do what I do and use half blind dovetails, which gives you the visual interest on the side of the drawer, but gives you the option of having a clean drawer front. A simplified version of the dovetail is the box joint, and I really like the clean kind of checkerboard appearance that this gives you, especially when using contrasting wood species like maple and walnut. And if you plane correctly, as I clearly did not, you can hide the groove for the bottom behind a finger and it won't be exposed. And making box joints is pretty simple with a box joint jig, which you can make yourself out of scraps or buy one for your table saw or router table. And yeah, that is the blade guard sitting right there because the camera can't see a darn thing when it's on. How dare they prioritize safety over video production? The nerve of some people. Fun fact, I won that box joint jig in a giveaway. It's the only giveaway I've ever won. I usually have the luck of a man with no luck, so I felt pretty special when I won it. I'm not sure what any of that has to do with this video, but I needed something to talk about while I finish this joint, so there you go. Once you have your joint cut on both pieces, it actually goes together really easily with a little glue. Okay, actually a lot of glue. This is one of the messiest joints that you could possibly make. That's going to take me a lot of sanding and cleanup. Or go back to the dowel method from before, but instead insert those dowels from the outside and leave them exposed. You can even go full Keith Johnson and use brass dowels for an extra classy look. And one thing to keep in mind if you are going to use this type of joint is that you need to make your fronts and backs a little bit longer to account for the fact that these joints interlock together, unlike butt joints. So if you're using butt joints to calculate the front and the back of the drawer box, you actually need to take the total width of the cabinet minus the thickness of the two sides, and that gets you this. On through joints like box joints and dovetails, it's actually a lot easier because the front and the back are equal to the total width of your final drawer, plus maybe a 1/16 of an inch extra, and that gives you the ability when you put the joint together to sand everything back nice and flush. The methods I've shown so far usually require that you build some type of false drawer front to cover the joinery on the face of the drawer, but there are two joints that you could use that remove that false front from the equation and give you a super clean look. First up, we have another classic woodworking joint, the locking rabbet. That's rabbit with an E, no bunnies were harmed in the making of this drawer. You can actually make this joint a couple different ways. The first way is just using a table saw by making a couple different cuts horizontally and vertically, but they also make a specialty router bit that does the same thing. And with a little glue, this joint is secured together, and this front part actually hides the joint, and you can extend that outward if you want to use it to, say, cover the side of your cabinet like you would with a drawer front. But with this method, you will get the tiniest little sliver of ingrain showing on the side of the drawer just because that front extends to cover up the joinery from the front. But there is one other method that is the best of all worlds, and it gives you a perfectly clean side and front. And to cut it, you need this terrifying looking router bit. Fair warning, there is a considerable amount of setup that goes along with this router bit to make sure you cut the perfect joint. It does take a little bit of trial and error to get it right, so make sure that you have some material, preferably the same material that you use to build the drawer front out of, to make sure that you get this thing dialed in perfectly before you run your final pieces through it. So there are whole YouTube videos dedicated to how to set up a lock miter bit properly, and I will leave a link down below to one that I think describes it the best. But here is a quick and dirty trick to figure out whether your bit is set up properly. With the cutting edge of the router bit set perpendicular to the fence, put your workpiece vertically against the fence and take a metal straight edge and lay it down next to it. Now, Run that along the bit and it should just barely kiss the cutting edge of the bit. Then set your workpiece flat on the table, put the straight edge on top of that and run it across again, and it should just barely scrape the bit. If both of those things are true, then your bit should be good to go. Once you do have it dialed in, it's really simple to execute. You just run one half of the joint horizontally across the front of the tabletop and then run the other half of the joint vertically along the fence. And when done correctly and it all comes together, you get an amazing, clean-looking, magical joint. And because this is a locking mitered joint, you don't have to worry about anything slipping around. You don't need special bang clamps, corner clamping, jigs, splines, nothing. Just regular clamps and it goes together just like a butt joint. And I am spraying water on these joints to clean up that glue squeeze out, which is not something I would normally do in a project. But I really want to have eyeballs on these joints to make sure that those miters are closing up properly, because once I'm cleaning this up at the end and the glue's dry, it's already too late to fix any problems. Okay, well, I have a bunch of drawers here and I need to get them in there, so now seems like a good time to talk about slides. For the most part, there are 3 basic types of slides that you can choose from, and I'm going to explain the pros and cons of using each one so that you can decide which one's going to work best for your application. So, to start, we're going to talk about the classic Euro glides. You'll find these a lot in old school kitchen cabinets or furniture pieces. The pros are that these are the cheapest slides you're going to be able to buy, and they're available at any home center. And they're also pretty easy to install because of this little lip that just wraps around the bottom of the drawer that you can fasten with a couple of screws. Also, I have these glides lined up flush with the front of the drawer box, which is what you would do if you're going to put a false front on the box. If that's not the case, if this is actually going to be the facing outward side of the box, then you can scoot these back so that the front edge is lined up with the back side of the drawer front, and that'll give you a cleaner look inside the cabinet. And they're not very visible, so you get a mostly clean-looking drawer side. The cons, though, are that this is a really basic no-frills version of a drawer slide. You're not going to get push to open or soft close like you're going to get on the more expensive slides. And this is also not a full extension slide, meaning that you cannot fully pull the drawer out of the cabinet, so searching for stuff in the back can sometimes be a pain. Another con of these slides is that there's very little adjustability, maybe 1/8 of an inch if you're lucky. So when you install these, you have to be pretty bang on with your location so that the drawer operates smoothly when it's installed. Then we step up to the side mount slides, and these are a little more expensive, but still relatively cheap and just as widely available as the Euro glides. And we have access to a lot more options. You can do the soft close or tap to open options, and this type of slide is full extension, so you can get to anything in the back of the drawer pretty easy. So as a general rule, I always install my side mount slides so that they line up with the bottom of the drawer like this, and I have a really neat trick to make sure that you get the part that goes attached to the drawer exactly where it needs to be so that it lines up with the part that's attached to the cabinet. Let me show you. So to begin, you just want to make sure that your drawer and the slide are sitting on a flat surface. Now just extend the slide out so the inside part lines up flush with the front of the drawer and screw it into place. Now just begin to walk the slide backwards, installing the screws in the center of the slide and then again at the back of the slide, and there you go. Now your slide's lined up exactly with the bottom of the drawer. But by far the biggest con of this slide is the aesthetics. You have this intrusive piece of metal across the side of your drawer. So if you're using side mounts, I really wouldn't worry about adding any type of fancy exposed joinery to the drawer because all anybody's ever going to see are these, which is why I think side mount slides are great for applications like workshops, laundry rooms, things like that, where functionality matters a lot more than looks. Then we have the Cadillac of drawer slides, the undermount, and it has all the same features of a side mount slide, but solves the problem of adjustability in all 3 directions, and it solves the aesthetic problem because you can't see them once they're installed. But as you probably guessed, to get all the features and solve all the problems, you're going to have to pay a premium. These are definitely the most expensive of the 3 slides. More than double the cost of a side mount slide, and also a little bit harder to get a hold of. You're not going to find these in the big box store. You're going to have to either order them from an online source or get them from a cabinet supply store. So I know a lot of woodworkers who swear by using undermount slides because of all the benefits that come along with using them. In my opinion, they're best reserved for premium applications like kitchen installs or really nice furniture pieces where you want that nice clean look. as well as the adjustability and options like soft close. And if you remember earlier in the video when I said there's another reason that I make my drawer backs shorter, well, this is it. See, normally when you do undermount slides, you've got to cut a couple of notches in the backside of the drawer to allow the arms of the undermount slides to come through. But because the entire back of the drawer is cut short, now it's like one big notch, which just makes these even easier to install. But regardless of which slide you choose, you still have to get it installed in the cabinet correctly, and my trick is to use a scrap of plywood as a spacer. This method makes it dead simple to get the slides positioned on both sides of the cabinet perfectly level and parallel to one another, as well as providing a helping hand by acting as a little ledge for the slide to sit on while I use my hands to install it. Besides being dead simple, it can be used with any of the three types of slides. You don't have to buy a fancy jig, and you most likely will have the perfect scrapper offcut for this job if you're making a lot of cabinets in your shop. The one thing you obviously need to remember with this method is that you need to start from the top of the cabinet and then work your way down, because obviously once you cut the spacer to install the next row of slides, you can't really go back without scabbing on another piece of scrap. Well, that's a nice trick and all, but right now you're probably asking how exactly did I know how to cut that plywood to get these slides all in the right location to make the perfect spacing of the drawers inside of the cabinet. And to answer that question, we got to rewind all the way back to the beginning and talk about the most mysterious and confusing part of building cabinets. To figure out how to size our drawers, we're going to tackle it one dimension at a time, starting with the depth, which is the easiest one to figure out. And that's because, with few exceptions, you want to make the depth of your drawer match the length of your drawer slide. So if you're using 18-inch drawer slides, then you're going to make drawers that are 18 inches deep. If you're using side mount slides, technically you could build your boxes bigger than the slides you're using, but they'll no longer be considered full extension slides because this part isn't going to come out of the cabinet. So how do you know what size slide to use in your cabinet? Well, these two always come in lengths of 2, so 12, 14, 16, all the way up to 24 inches. And the undermounts like to be different, and they come in lengths of 3, so 15, 18, 21, 24. So just measure the inside depth of your cabinet and round down to the nearest slide size, and that's the maximum size slide you can use. So my little example cabinet here is 17 inches deep on the inside, which means the largest slide I can use is 16 inches if I'm going with side mounts or Euros, but only 15 inches if I'm going with undermounts. Okay, with depth figured out, we need to tackle width, and this is a little more complicated because it actually depends on what type of slide you use. Again, with side mounts and Euros, the calculation is the same. The drawer box needs to be 1 inch narrower than the opening of the cabinet. But with undermounts, things get a little weird because the slide sits under the drawer and not beside it. The calculation is a bit different. So to size for undermount slides, you actually need to make the distance from inside edge to inside edge, that's from here to here, 42 millimeters or 1 and 21/32 narrower than the opening of the cabinet. And that's to make sure that the drawer actually sits flush on top of these two arms. Now, if that sounds like a little bit mathy and complicated, it is. But a good rule of thumb that I found that works is if you're making your drawers out of 5/8 inch material, then make the width of the drawer 3/8 of an inch narrower than the opening. And if you're using 1/2 inch material, make it 5/8 of an inch narrower than the opening. And that has always seemed to work really well for me. All right, here comes the mathy part. So now we got to figure out the heights of all the drawers and all of that spacing so everything fits nicely inside the cabinet. And for that, I got to go to a diagram. Okay, let's say this is your cabinet. First, you need to know the total height of the opening of your cabinet, which in this example is going to be 27.5 inches. Then you need to decide the number of drawers you want in your cabinet. I want 3. Now, you want a minimum of 1 inch of space above each drawer and a 1/2 inch space below the bottom drawer. You could always make these spaces wider, but I wouldn't recommend going below 1 inch. So, I know I need 1 inch of space here, 1 inch here, 1 inch here, and a 1/2 inch here for a total of 3.5 inches of dead space. Then if I subtract that dead space from the total height, I see that I have 24 inches of available space left for drawers. And if I want 3 drawers that are all equal in size, then I just divide that 24 by 3, and each one of my drawers is 8 inches tall. And let's say that I want the bottom drawer to actually be bigger than the other two. So let's say that's 10 inches now. Well, then I just need to subtract the other 2 inches from the other drawer. So 1 inch from here and 1 inch from here. So now my drawers will be 7 inches, 7 inches, and 10 inches, which still adds up to 24, so I'm safe. And because I always mount my slides at the bottom edge of the drawer, figuring out the slide positions is as easy as measuring from the bottom of the cabinet to the bottom of each drawer in my diagram. So now you have a method for spacing out drawers in any cabinet. That's all I know about drawers. See you next time.